Okay, we're continuing with Halacha Beis. Halacha Beis is all about cheese. And last time we spoke, we started talking about convenience Yisrael and where it applies. And today we're going to go a little bit out from that topic, and that is we're going to begin our discussion about whey. Whey, as you remember, is when you make a cheese, the curd is the cheese part of it, and the part that's left over, this liquid, a clear, grayish liquid that's left over, that's called whey. Now the whey is not k'vinas apple. When you make cheese, the curd is k'vinas apple. The whey is not k'vinas apple. So, in theory, the whey is kosher. Even if you have whey left over from cheese that was not kosher, the whey is kosher. And so, but the status of the whey used to be a complete non-issue. Okay, until let's say 40, 50 years ago, nobody could care less about the din of the whey. And the reason is because whey was garbage. When you finished making your cheese, the curd was what you wanted. You took the cheese, and the whey was you just poured it out. It had no meaning to it. There was no one wanted it. I don't know what they did with it, but it was garbage. Okay, no one wanted it. But what's happened is companies have been trying to squeeze every penny they can out of something, so they'll use everything. I mean, we have companies that use every mama's piece of garbage that they have listed on a plane to make something else. So dairy companies came up with, wanted to use the whey. And second is, municipalities wouldn't let people pour whey down their sewers. It somehow was not good for the sewers. They wouldn't let them pour it down the sewers. So companies were having to pay extra to get rid of it, to pour it down the drain. So again, those two reasons why they were pushed to try to find things to do with whey. And they came up with all kinds of things. Now whey is in all kinds of products, because they had to be creative to think of what to do with it. And Mamela, what's come to us is that they all want to be kosher. If you want to sell your whey to an ice cream company, that ice cream company has hashgacha. So all of a sudden, you, Mr. Cheese Manufacturer, who would never be kosher, all of a sudden want your whey to be kosher so you could sell it to the ice cream company. If you want to sell it to someone who sells whey protein for bodybuilding, they have all kinds of things that people are doing with it. So you want to get hashgacha, and has brought the shilav, the status of whey, up to the hashgachas. Has become a very serious issue. I thought we were going to do it in one time, but as I'm working on it, I see it's going to be 2 times. That's how much is going on with it, about shilas, about whether the whey is kosher or not.
What did companies do before they had whey?
What do you mean by that?
You said whey was just...
They're not such a fancy product nowadays.
How do they make ice cream? I mean, you said like ice cream companies, for example.
I don't know exactly what role it plays. It's substituted for something else. They said, we'll throw it. I don't know. I don't know what the point is.
I don't know.
The company
knows something became milk, right? Not that something becomes a milk, and you have to put the whey into the...
Right. So what's the replacement?
What? No, it just adds shelf
maybe
life.
It added something, it made more protein. I don't know how they convinced people what it was doing to people. I don't know. But it became an industry because the dairies were trying to do something with it. They didn't want to throw it out. They couldn't, or they didn't want to throw it out, so they came up with all these ideas of what to do. Okay? So we're going to see that there are 3 ways, I'm going to keep following this. There are 3 methods that whey can become not kosher. Okay? There are 3 possibilities of how it could be not kosher. The etzem is not kosher. The etzem is kosher. There are three possibilities of it becoming scenarios of it becoming not kosher, okay? And they are. First is, the cheese could have been set. The cheese could have coagulated at above Yad Soledes boy. Okay? I'm going to say these quickly now, and then we're going to go through them later. It could have done at above Yad Soledes boy, so it has a bliya from the cheese. Second is, sometimes after the cheese is made, it's cooked after it's been made. Or stretched, that's another way of saying it. It's cooked in water, and that water can be thrown into the rest of the whey. That's the second way. And the third is...
the cheese in water by itself?
After they finish making the cheese, certain cheeses, mozzarella cheeses, certain cheeses that you want to be stretched, more stretchy, they cook, they take the cheese, after it's completely done, put it into a big container of water, and they cook it up.
What they do is they take that water...
And then that water, after you're cooking that water all day long, it has all kinds of things have leached into the water, and they don't throw that water out either. They throw that into the whey. Okay, that's called cooked water. That's what it's called, cooked water. Very original name. It's called cooked water. And the third way it could be treif is if the rennet that you used to make the cheese was a treif rennet, like an animal rennet, then that has an effect on the cheese also. So as I said to you, we're going to talk about only the first one of those today. The first one was that the cheese was set above Yad Soledes.
Does it have a kobush? Could it ever happen that the curd sits in the whey, in the liquid whey?
We're going to talk about that today, in passing. Nowadays, no, it's not. But we're going to talk about that in passing, such a possibility. So we're going to talk about these 3 ways that it could become not kosher, 3 methods that the whey can become not kosher. Today we're going to talk about our first way, and we're going to talk about whether it's not kosher or not. In Mitzvah next time, when we do the other 2, we're going to talk about a secondary question, which is, let's say it's not kosher, what about if it was made on kalim? Is it so treif that it affects kalim? Okay? For each one of these 3 things, it's going to be different. We're going to talk about that in Mitzvah It's part of next time also. Okay. So we're talking about now cheese that was made at above Yad soledes. So you should know that when you make cheese, what they call the set temperature, the temperature at which they change it from milk into cheese, that temperature is very significant and very well controlled by people who make cheese. At least nowadays. I don't know what was 1,000 years ago, but nowadays they very well control. They control it very well. And they if you remember, when you make a cheese, you also put in something called a culture. The culture is put in at the beginning. It helps in breaking down the cheese, and it has a lot to do with the flavor and the style of cheese that it's going to be later on. And they group cultures into two groups. There are many types of cultures, but they group them into two groups. And they're called mesophilic and thermophilic. Okay? Mesophilic are the kinds of cultures that only function at lower temperatures. They don't work at above, they tell me, 102 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, they function at lower temperatures. And the thermophilic means that they love heat. That's what thermophilic means. They love heat. They can go even higher to about 130 degrees. Okay, so when you're making a cheese, first of all, you pick your culture based on how hot you're going to make it. But even more so, you control the temperature to a very specific. This cheese is going to be made at 109 degrees, or at 95 degrees, or 118 degrees, or the temperature is very well controlled to make it a certain temperature. So Mamela, the person who wants to see, is this cheese made above or below Yad soledes, it's not a secret what temperature they make the cheese at. It doesn't just happen at a whim what temperature it gets set at. It's very thought through what should happen. That said, most of the cheeses that we deal with are below Yad soledes. Most of the cheeses that we are lower. The ones that tend to be higher are the Italian and Swiss cheeses. Italian cheeses like Parmesan and Provolone. The Italian and Swiss cheeses are the ones that tend to be done at higher. In this, I'll just point something out. It's worth thinking about is, when you ask a company for the set temperature of the cheese, you want to understand how they set it. A company could honestly say, we set our cheese at 95 degrees. Okay, they really do. And they set it at 95 degrees. But after the cheese is set, what they'll do is, I'm describing, this is one of the ways to make Parmesan cheese. Okay? After you set it at 95 degrees, and it separates, then you cut it up into tiny little pieces, cut the curd into tiny little pieces, and then raise the temperature to 130 degrees and let it sit there for another 45 minutes before you really separate the cheese and separate the curd from the whey. So what I'm saying is that a company could have told you we set our cheese at 95 degrees, because that's what they did. They really did set it at 95 degrees. But if you went through all the steps, you'd find out that actually there was a hotter part to the process later on when it was over Yad soledes. Okay. So before we get to the cheeses, well, as a way of talking about the cheeses that are above Yad soledes, we're going to talk about the assumption that cheeses that are below Yad soledes don't have blias. There's no blia from the curd into the whey for cheeses below Yad soledes. That's the assumption we're working with. Okay, well, there's two serious questions. That's what we're going to talk about today. Two serious questions on that assumption. And the first one is, when you make cheese, you have a big vat of milk, you do something to it, and all of a sudden it separates into this curd and this whey. It doesn't separate it's not like oil and vinegar, that when oil and water, that when you put them into a container, they separate 100% perfectly, separated in 1 second from each other. What happens is, that all of a sudden globules of curd start forming, and they floating around in the whey. Okay, to the point that when you remove the curd out of that, you squeeze the curd out to get all the whey out. But it's not a perfect separation. It's not two clear lines, curd, whey. It doesn't work like that. They're all mixing together with each other. So aren't there amounts of whey that are mixed in, curd that are mixed into the whey? Why are we worried about blias only if it's above Yad soledes? Aren't there pieces of curd mixed into the whey? So maybe you'll tell me that we really do a good job filtering it out and getting no curd left into it. And blia is I'm worried about that there's no be'en left, but tam spread into the thing. What do you mean tam? The stuff is all mixed together. It's all in a big vat in a whole mixture of curd, and the whole stuff is all together. So the whey is not whey. The whey is whey with a little curd in it. There's no curd in that stuff. If we think about blias, this is seems to be more than that. And maybe you'll tell me that you think it filters out fully. Maybe there's such a thing. Here's what David said Rav Moshe says. He says it used to be that there would be times they would leave them sitting together for more than 24 hours. I have a feeling he was talking about soft cheeses, acid-set cheeses. I don't know why somebody would do it with that hard cheese. He's not clear which cheese he's talking about. But he says people would do it. So he says, so why isn't it Kosher? Why isn't it Kosher? They sat together for 24 hours. So why don't we say that the cheese, which is usher, gave a tam into the whey, which used to be mutter. They sing together, all mixed together for 24 hours. So it's the same kind of a question. What's going on? Why isn't there blia going from the curd into the whey while you're making the cheese? So, because of this question, this is one of the reasons why Ramosha says that Chazal told us that either the truth is, or we should pretend. He says it could be either one. But when they made the takon of Gvinas Akum, they told us, built into the takon was that there is, in the making of the cheese, there is no transfer of tam from the curd into the whey. Doesn't happen. There's no transfer of time. Either it really doesn't have time, or we should pretend it doesn't. We'll call it what you want to, but there's no transfer of time from one into the other. That's one way he explains it.
Time. You were discussing the vein, not the time.
Same thing. He said, those things, there's no transfers. They're like, look at them as two distinct things, even though it looks to you that there should be transfers, either called tam, right? Either through tam or through be'en, either one. Nothing happens. They're like two completely separate things.
What's the meaning about that? I see there's some curd going down. What does he do?
So I guess he means is get it. You're going to get those pieces out to the extent that you can. But all of us would say, come on, I got the pieces out. But you think I got it every little drop? And I'm worried about bleas. What?
Those little veins won't be bottled?
I don't know. That's what, okay. Maybe. Well, he means the end that I can't see. As I filtered it, I got it, the pieces that I could. Do I think that the little pieces that are left? Okay, maybe that's the answer. And Rav says a different angle on the same thing, different answer to the same questions is, if you remember when we spoke about Chol Yisrael, we said Rav Moshe holds that Chol of Akum doesn't become Asher till it's Higir Yad Yisrael. Till Yid gets it, that's when it becomes Asher. So too, he says, the same rule applies to Gvina. Gvina doesn't become Asher till it's Higir Yad Yisrael. So in the cheese vat, it was mutter. It's only when you turned the cheese and brought it into jewel and the Yid came to buy it, that's when it became Asher. At that point, it's very far removed from the way. It's not a problem. It's only the green is only Asher. It's not Asher in the tank. We're saying it's Asher in the tank and it's giving over time. Versus no, it's not true. It's not Asher in the tank. Okay. He brings another raya, besides for the logic of it. He has another raya from the Prichadosh we spoke about a few times ago about ricotta cheese. He brings rayas from that Prichadosh that the Prichadosh also holds there's no bleed there. It's above Yad Soledes, and that there's no bleeds going on in the tank here. Okay, that's what Rav Moshe says. Rabbi Soloveitchik had a variation of it. It's really very similar. He doesn't agree with the link. Okay, I'm sorry. Rabbi Shimon Soloveitchik. Sorry. Wrong city. He disagrees with the way Rav Moshe says it, that it's also till Yad Yisrael, but he has a different view on it. He says the Takonos Chachamim was to not eat Gvinas Akum. Well, when it's in the tank, it's not Gvinas Akum, because it's not Gvina yet. When there's still curd floating around in the whey, it's not yet Gvina. It only becomes Gvina when you pull it out of the tank, squeeze out all the whey, and it looks like cheese, like what we think of in our house. When you go in your house and you look at cheese, that's cheese. When you see the stuff floating around, you say that's not cheese. That's stuff that's on its way to becoming cheese. He says it doesn't come us until it becomes cheese, which is well after it leaves the tank. Okay, so it's not. It's the. In the logic of it, of how he comes to it, he's saying it differently than Rav Moshe in the mechanics of how it works. Differently than Rav Moshe said, but the point is the same, that they're both saying that in the cheese vat, it's not usher. That means is that they would hold, even if the cheese was above Yad Soledes at this point, there's no blias. Even if the cheese would be above Yad Soledes at this point, there's no blias in that tank. So they don't, what we said at the beginning, that a cheese that's above Yad Soledes, but they wouldn't hold like that. Yes, sir.
What's the history again? When it's mixed up in the tank, what is it referring to? The history of the cheese. We're talking about the cheese. We're
talking about the whey. No, the cheese is treif.
The cheese, okay.
But they want to make the whey kosher. That's what okay. My point at the beginning I was trying to say was that these companies that are making treif cheese want to sell their whey as kosher anyhow. So they're making Gvinas Akum, but they want their whey to be considered kosher.
Gvinas Yisrael is that what?
It's not Gvinas. This is not Gvinas. This is a plain old treif cheese. Johnny's. We haven't found. We don't know what that is yet. We're going to find out in.
So now we're just
Gvinas Akum. It's Gvinas Akum. You go to Johnny's Cheese Company, drive down the road in Wisconsin, and you go to every farm, and it's Johnny's Cheese Company. His cheese is Gvinas Akum, but he wants his whey to become kosher. So we say if your whey is
right. Well, so we're taking it, and we know the Gvina is treif.
Yeah, it's treif. It's Gvinas Akum.
It was made by a guy.
Not because of the ingredient. Not because of the ingredient. Because the Gvinas Akum, there's a takana. For example, you have to have Gvinas Yisrael. unfortunately, for the way, the structure of how we're doing it, we're not going to find out what it takes to make Gavina Yisrael for 2 times from now. I said last time 2 times, but whatever, 2 times from now.
No, the cheese is straight because of...
Gavina Yisrael. Gavina Yisrael.
It's there, under Rabbanan. That's
Correct.
the last one, right?
Just Gavina Yisrael. It's all kosher ingredients, but it's Gavina Yisrael. Okay, anyhow. So that's what he said. Now,
So the reason is that there's no blias, but the cheese...
so Ramesh says either there's no blias, Chazal tells not to have blias, or there are blias, but it's not Isser, because it's not Higi Yad Yisrael. Or Rabbi Soloveitchik, there are blias, but it's not Isser because it's not Gavin yet. So there's theoretically there's blias, but who cares if there's blias? So they're saying, but if it's hot, it doesn't hot or cold, it's all the same.
So it's not Gvina. Eventually it becomes
So Ramesh says,
Gvina until it comes out of the water?
so you pull it out of the water, squeeze out all the juice, and make it into what you think cheese looks like. Not what Yossi thinks cheese looks like. What you think cheese looks like. At your house, you open up a package of stacked cheese, and it looks like cheese, you know?
When they have what's called cheese curds. Cheese curds, they dry it,
Mm-hmm.
and before when they're ready to press it, they take out a
They
certain
keep it
amount.
mushy still, right?
Well, it's dried. But
Okay.
they take this stuff and they put it into bags, and they sell people just popping
That would still be Gvina, because that's still been separated from its curd, and it hasn't been pressed, it hasn't been turned into a block, but it's still the same thing. He would say that's cheese also.
Okay.
But our question is in the tank itself. Okay, now there was a person.
Just a side thing. Rabbi Soloveitchik never wrote anything. There's only
No,
hearsay.
told us to me, right? Okay, now what happened is like this. He may have written notes. I don't know. But I don't know like that.
Never saw anything.
That's not
Seconded it, right?
That's not how I know it. Okay, now there's a person. I don't know how many of you heard the name. His name was Moshe Bernstein. Moshe Bernstein used to, for many years, work at OU. And he later worked other places.
Here in Chicago?
No. It was in New York. In the New York area. He later worked for other people, but he worked for many years for OU. He's not alive anymore. And he wrote a shaila to Rav Wasser. And from the way Rav Wasser answers to it, the tone is that he was proposing what Rabbi Soloveitchik said. Okay? He may have even said it from him. I mean, he was working at the OU, so it could be Rav Soloveitchik told him, and he wrote to Rav Wasser telling him, what do you think about this? Okay? And he actually wanted to say, Rabbi Moshe Bernstein wanted to say was the machlokes we mentioned that time between the Pri Chodesh and the Radvaz as to whether ricotta cheese needs Gvina Yisrael is totally in this. That the Pri Chodesh who's Makel? I don't remember. But the Makel about ricotta cheese is because he holds there's no blias until it becomes cheese, until you pull it out there are no blias. And the Machmirim about ricotta cheese hold that there are blias, and since it was above Yad, so that's why there are blias going in. That's how he's saying to Rav Wasser, that's what he thinks the pshat in that machlokes should be. And as you know, Rav Wasser didn't agree with that pshat. Rav Wasser said, no, the machlokes is whether acid cheese needs Gvina Yisrael or not. That's what he said about it. That's what we spoke about a few times ago, last time. And he argues on all the rayas. He goes through all the rayas that to prove there's such a thing. And Rav Wasser says it's not true. If the thing is above Yad soledes in the tank, then it's Gvina Yisrael. Then the pleasing to the way, and the way is not kosher. Okay, so Rav Wasser disagrees, and we, by and large, follow the hashkachas. Right? The hashkachas, by and large, follow what Rav Wasser said, which is we assume that if the cheese was set at above Yad soledes, then the whey is not going to become kosher. If it was set below Yad soledes, it's kosher. If it's above Yad soledes, it's not kosher. But as I've said to you, here we have 2 other people, Ramesh and Soloveitchik, who said that it was mutter, even if it's above Yad soledes. In practice, for the making of the whey, we don't do that. Well, see next time, maybe it has some nafkaminits. Okay, but in practice, most hashkachas, basically all the hashkachas follow what Rav Wasser said, that they will not consider the whey to be kosher if it was set above Yad soledes. Okay, how they answered my question, I'm not convinced. I'm not sure. Okay, so that was one question we had. One discussion we had about, is it better to be below Yad soledes than above Yad soledes? The second question is like this. What you see in the tank over here, this is like a mini version of it. This is called the double O. Okay, this is a common way you make cheese. This is a really mini version of it, but it's called the double O. You see the 2 circles over there. That's why it's called double O. Okay, and what it is it's a tank, and it has these mixing, stirring arm blades that turn around and keep it moving around. That's filled with milk. You stir it, and it keeps on stirring around. After you add the rennet and the curd starts to separate, you keep on stirring it, and it breaks it apart and does all kinds of important things that you need to do. Okay? That's what it is. Now, I told you that the cheese they're not always made in this kind of thing, but this is a common, it's worth seeing it once anyhow. That's common, they get a little cutie, but usually they're bigger, but that's how they make it. So, I told you that you want to make a cheese at an exact temperature. You have 95 degrees, 109 degrees. You have an exact temperature you want to make it at. Okay, well, how do they make it at temperature? Okay, so all the Kashrus people look at the picture and say, well, because that double O is really a jacketed kettle. It really, it has a jacket to it. And in those walls, the reason why the walls are so thick is because there's steam in those walls. Okay, there's room for steam to flow through those walls, and therefore they can make the temperature a very specific temperature by running steam through it. And they run the steam, keeps it just so, and keeps it at 95, 118, whatever the temperature that we're trying to do. Okay? So the question is, let's say the company comes...
Which is true. It is steam jacket.
It is true, yes. So let's say...
I was waiting for the punch.
No. Wait, I'm about to get to a question. The question is like this. Let's say the company says our cheese never goes over 118, and the Mashiach stands there for 6 weeks straight, and he sees the temperature probe never goes over 118. Okay, it's really true. That's all they do. Their cheese, and they're very serious about this. If they're going to set cheese at 118, that's what it is. It's at 118. Well, the way they get it to 118 is by running steam through the jacket. The steam is, let's say, 240, 250 degrees. So that means that on the edges, there's steam that's 250 degrees. At the center, it's 118 degrees. Well, 118 is perfect, because 120 is Yad Soledes point. So if the middle is just by the line of Yad Soledes, it's just a drop under, it's so close to Yad Soledes point, then, and the edges are 250, it's getting heated by the edges that are 250. Well, aren't the edges over Yad Soledes point? I mean, if the middle is 118,
what? The walls?
the center, does the center
The vat or the...
of the vat?
Oh,
The vat is
They're going to do that. They're going to ruin the cheese.
What do you mean?
The edges, the milk on the edges?
The milk that along the edges
of fit?
No, it's not.
because...
It's
Because it's mixing around.
Okay, so we're getting to it. Okay, fine. You guys are so smart. You can sort of jump right to the end. Okay.
And then see that if they want 118 degrees to make the cheese, I mean that they're ruining everything on the side because it'll be 125.
Okay, so, hold on a second. We're going to get to that. Okay, let's first do the question. You guys are really smart. I'm sorry.
Where is Tatal Dover? They should be Tatal Dover.
Hold on a second. Give me a second. So if, for us, simple people, if the middle is 118 degrees and the outside is 250 degrees, why isn't there, you can go back on garbage, go whatever you want to, why isn't the edges above Yad Soledes? It's so close. It's not like the middle is 60 degrees. If the middle is almost Yad Soledes, right? Everything 120 is Yad Soledes. So it's almost Yad Soledes. So you don't think the edges are drop hotter to make it out to me. Okay, so for those of you who can answer, you can leave. Okay. Anyhow, so to ask this question to Rabbi Shechter 2 different times that I know of. Okay, one time he said mutter, one time he said asr. Okay, so then the third time they said to him, okay, guys, these are got years apart from each other. It wasn't like he said to him, today, tomorrow. He said mutter asr, and he said the same raya that it was mutter than should be asr. Okay, and then the third time we came to him and said, okay, good, now you see, you said mutter and asr. Now what's the truth? And he said a different shot. Okay, so I'll tell you what he said. He said like this: there's a shach that talks about a case. This is the raya that he brought. A shach that talks about a case that seems to be very similar to what we're talking about over here. And the shach is talking about a case. You have a pot of food cooking on the fire, sitting cooking on the fire, and the pot didn't get to be Yad Soledes at this point. Is there a bliya, between the pot and the product in the pot if we know that there's this raging fire underneath it? The fire is 1,500 degrees underneath there. But the pot is not Yad Soledes at this point. We stick our hand, it's not Yad Soledes at this point. Is there a transfer of time or there's no transfer of time? Okay? That's our case here.
The pot and food, the pot.
The food is not Yad Soledes at this point.
Okay.
But is there transfer between the pot and the food?
Because the pot is mercy means Yad Soledes.
Well, that's part of the question. What should we do here? We got this big fire on the bottom, and that's really our case. We have heat all around the edges, and we have the heat around the edges, but the middle is not getting Yad Soledes at this point. Now, we're really sophisticated. We do it with a thermometer. I'm thinking he did it just with his finger. But the same idea, which is, one part of it is boiling hot, and the other part is not Yad Soledes. Okay, and there they weren't trying to make cheese. There they weren't being so fancy as to keep it at an exact temperature, but it hadn't gotten Yad Soledes this way. So the shach be'etzem thinks you should be mekel. His leaning is that you should be mekel. You should say there's no transfer. But in the end, he brings others who argue, and he defers to them and says they said you should assume there's a time. He's machlim to say that there's a transfer of time.
Where is that?
Kuf hey, sif katan hey, sif hey, sif katan hey. He says that in the end, it's at the end. It's a long sif. And I'm not throwing you to a long one just because you don't have to look at it. It's towards the end. Okay, it's towards the end. And in the end, he says no, but he's going to accept what they say. On that, the Prim Gadol brings on that, and the Prim Gadol is much shorter than the shach. The Prim Gadol brings what? So no, it's not so hard over here. He brings a Mechas Yaakov. The Mechas Yaakov says like this: that you should be machmir. To say that a transfer happens when it's on the fire, but there's not Yad Soledes at this point, that's only when you're talking about, I have to read something, I never remember this. That's only if we're talking about tam going from the kli into the food. But when you're talking about tam going from the food into the food, or from the food into the kli, that doesn't happen. I don't know why. That's why I always have to look at try to remember. When they're talking about tam going from the kli into the food, that's what the shach is being machmir that the tam could transfer. But when you talk about tam going from the food into the kli, doesn't happen. If it's on the fire, but it's not yet going from the food into the kli, doesn't happen, and from the food to the food also doesn't happen. So, Rabbi Shechta said, that's what we have here. We have a pot, that the pot is on the fire, the food is not yet soledes, but there's no transfer from the food to the food, there's no transfer from the food to the food, even though it's on the fire. So even though it's on the fire, since the food did not get to be soledes, but there's no transfer. Maybe there's bleeds along the edges, it's hot along the edges. No, that's what people got on. Don't worry about that. You don't have to be kosher that there's tam transferring like that, and there's no tam transferring between the food and the food. So the curd and the whey are both blowing out soledes, and you're okay. That's what he said the first time. Second time he said, well, it's true that there's no transfer from the food to the food. He says, but why isn't it tatal gavar? Why don't we say tatal gavar? The pot is hot. So tatal gavar makes it hot kadei klipa. It makes hot kadei klipa. Then along the edges there should be bleeds transferring back and forth.
What kind of bleeds? What bleeds are there? This food was only used for
no, the bleeds are from the curd to the whey. The bleeds are whatever. There's treif and kosher floating around in this pot. This curd is treif. This whey that's kosher. They're floating around as
no, that's food to food.
Right. So but he says, but if it's tatal gavar, that means it's kadei klipa is getting hot. The klipa is getting hot, so then...
I presume that the food itself is...
So it's getting hot, and then, right, so at that point...
There's a piece of curd on the bottom.
Next to the... Yes. And the whey is hot. So he said, well, which one is it? Make up your mind, which one is it? So he says,
well... the opposite. Whatever reason we say that the food to food there's no bleeds, we don't say that to go over either.
Good question. Here's a good question. I'm about to answer that question. Good. That's a very good question. Which is to say is, okay, we'll skip ahead, okay? Your point is, the shach was exactly the same case. The shach and Pim, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about in a nice big hot pot, there's a fire on the bottom, and the middle is not got soledes, and they're saying, don't be worried about that. Whatever reason is not going to be worried about, but why are you more concerned than they are? They were talking about the same case. So now really, it's more than that. As everyone said before, in our case, it's much more sophisticated than the Pri Megadon's Balbuster. She just put a pot into the fire. Okay, she's not doing anything to move time around, move heat, and controlling temperature. Nothing doing. The bottom could be boiling hot and the top could be cold. These guys are being very particular to make sure that the transfer happens a certain way. They don't want it to become more than 118. Like Bubba did. They don't want the edges to become more than 18, and they're stirring it. They're doing things to make sure that doesn't happen. In fact, they told us they don't just do that. Really, the people who make cheese said they're much smarter than this. They don't wait till it gets to 118 in the middle. The machine is smart enough to know that when it gets to be, 110 in the middle, they stop running steam from the edges. Because they know the edge is a little hotter, so the steam turns off. It's not like in your oven. When it hits the temperature, it turns off. Because they're so careful about the temperature, when the middle hits a bunch of degrees less, it already turns off, so that slowly the whole thing gets to be 118. They don't let anything get over 118. Okay? And so this is much more sophisticated. But the truth is, and Rabbi Shechta had said, whatever his answer, we're skipping his answer, how he answered it, his steer between himself. We don't need to be smarter. We don't need to be smarter than what the Shach was saying. That's what they're talking about this case, and they're talking on a much less sophisticated level, and they're saying that there's no time. Rabbi Belsky understood that in all cases, the liquid just draws the heat away from the edges of the pot. Maybe that's what Yossi thought before. It just draws the heat away all the time, and there's no buildup of heat. In our minds, if you think that there's heat at the bottom and there's cold on the top, the water is drawing away the heat very quickly. I don't know the physics of it, but we believe it. Okay, so they're saying is that if the thing is blowing out at this point, I'll throw in, Rosh Hashanah threw in, he says, Lamaisa is chances are that 120 is not really Yad Soledes by anyhow. So we're saying 120 is borderline Yad Soledes, but he says the truth is Yad Soledes probably like 140, 150. So he throws everything. Whatever. It's 120 is not really so borderline Yad Soledes, but don't feel so bad about it. That's what he says. It's the truth is, it's probably like 140. The truth is that you stick your finger, doesn't Yad Soledes, but yeah, it's not. It's really like 140 probably anyhow. So we're marking 120, but don't take it so seriously. Okay. So now there's a weakness to what we're saying. Okay. I'm going to say a point. You'll see it's not totally Lamaisa, but there's a point which is like this. All that we just said applies if this company only makes, let's say, cheddar cheese, and the cheese that they make is always below Yad Soledes by. What happens if they also make Swiss cheese? Well, they make some cheeses that are above Yad Soledes by. So if they make any cheeses that are above Yad Soledes by, then there are blias into the walls of treif cheese. The Pri Megadim said you could be making little transfers from food to food and from food to kli. So the kli doesn't become treif when you run a cheese at 118 degrees. But when you run the cheese at 130 degrees, the walls are treif. Now, when I run cheddar cheese at 105 degrees or 95 degrees, I run that cheese, the blias from the transfers from the kli into the food, that's what the Shach said is usher. That's what the Pri Megadim agreed that was usher. So the only way it could be makel is if the company always does their cheese at below Yad Soledes. If they ever do it above Yad Soledes, then this clause is not going to work. The point was that the Pri Megadim said from food to food there's no tam, or from food to the kli there's no transfers. But once the kli became treif because they once made a hot cheese, doesn't do you any good. Yes, Ken.
Two questions. First of all, you're assuming that the steam system is not a closed system, and the second thing is, doesn't shishim come in because the some of these, I mean, this vat maybe not, but in the vats that are in the realistic big time,
Big ones, yeah.
the big ones, you're never going to get shishim out of those walls.
Okay, so both of your points may be valid. It may depend on the steam system. It may depend on the size of the tank. That's not, like, we don't really like to do it that way and say, well, it's bottle, well, it's, you know.
No, I'm just saying, is we always kosher. I mean, that's the standard in kosher. But, well,
No.
Never touched the cheese, right?
You say, you look at the cheese and you say, cheese?
Right.
I'm making, so in what we're talking about, I'll get into you in 1 second. In what we're talking about, Whey, this is not such a nafkamina l'maisa. Because if a company made some cheeses above Yad Soledes and some below, we would never allow the Whey. Because in l'maisa, that means they would have some kosher Whey and some treif Whey. So in practice, we would never be thinking about taking away from a company that says, on Mondays they make treif cheese, on Tuesdays they make kosher cheese. We wouldn't take the Whey, because there'd be kosher Whey and treif Whey floating around. But it's again to what Ken just said, which is, if we go to a company to make cheese, so we say, I'm making cheese at below Yad Soledes, but I don't have to kasher the double O. I use the double O without kashering it, because it's below Yad Soledes. I said, I don't care what they did yesterday, because I'm making below Yad Soledes. And on that, I'm saying not to do that. If he's saying is, if they ever make treif cheese, then the tanks are treif. And then there could be blias from the treif tank into the liquid, even though it's below Yad Soledes. Even though it's below Yad Soledes, there's a blia because it's on the fire. The liquid is below Yad Soledes, so there's a transfer from the kli into the product. So the means is, if I'm making cheddar cheese, it's below Yad Soledes, but the tank is treif. If the tank is treif, there's a blia from that tank into the liquid, so I have to kasher the tank, even though my thing is below Yad Soledes. That's what because I have it on the fire. So that's a subtlety that I suspect gets missed. Okay, now the case that we were talking about really away is not sort of Yelamaisa. That someone should take kosher away from a place that made treif Whey yesterday is very not Lamaisa. People don't do it. You never know. Whey is Whey. It all looks the same. No one would accept from that kind of a company. But making cheese, we do. And making cheese, we don't do it. Cancer. We don't kasher it. We say it's below Yad Soledes, but who cares? Just make the cheese in it, and it's coming out from this Pri Megadim that we should be mafing it.
What about the fact that sometimes, it's a very exact temperature, but once in a while, malfunction happens, and I don't know, the thermostat, whatever it is, goes up, maybe they lose a vat or two, until they realize what's going on.
And therefore what?
And therefore, there is blias, because when it went over the temperature.
So you're saying is that even if you think this company only makes cheese below Yad Soledes, sometimes it gets over Yad Soledes. It goes wrong. Okay, that's a good question. So you're saying we would accept Whey from this company because they're basically below Yad Soledes, but you think once in a while they tack a mess up and then they throw it all in the garbage. But, okay, that's a good question. I would guess the RC for the cheese and see what he says about it. Okay, no, it's a good question. But I guess we're not being cautious for that. That's just a weird. I'm not sure. That's a good question. Okay, but this other question about the kashering the vats is more serious. Now, one last thing that I'm just going to mention. I'm not going to talk about this. Is something that comes up every so often. It just came up. Rabbi Linda just had this, which is, if a company keeps their cheese below Yad Soledes, I told you they maintain the temperature by running in the steam in the jackets. Some people, I don't know why, but some people choose to also pour in hot water into the tank. So what they're doing is they're pouring in hot water right into the milk. So the thing is below Yad Soledes, but they're pouring in boiling water, 150 degree water into the vat. So is there a concern that at the point of contact, where that water plops into the milk, at that point it's causing some of that to become above Yad soledes and make bliyas there between the curd and the whey. Okay, it's a shayla that comes up. I'm not convinced we have a firm answer on that yet.
Is it for like a lot of water? Or a little?
They pour in, whatever. So it's all kinds of jobs. You can talk to Charlie about it. He's been working on it. Yeah, okay, we'll stop it.